Hey guys, welcome back to another Gaming Memories video. Here we are taking a look at Last Chamber that was released for the PlayStation back in 1996 for both the PlayStation 1 and the Sega Saturn. The game was supposed to be released for the PC on Windows 95 at that time. The game did receive a demo for the PC, but it never got a full release. And this game is quite quirky and quite obscure. Even for the time, it was one of the first of its kind, as there wasn't really many style of games like this out there, and it was also the first 4-player multiplayer style game for consoles, because most games up to that point really only allowed you to play with 2 players, but this game allowed you to play with 4. So if you managed to get access to like the PlayStation accessory like of the multi-tap, you could connect 4 controllers up so that you could play with your mates. And this game is very different and quirky, as I mentioned, as the idea behind this game is that you're confined to like a cube type of room. There's a total of around 60 different environments throughout the course of the game that you have to get through, and there are many different game modes available. You have like eliminator modes where you have to be the last one standing in the game to win, and you also have like single player modes where you can play through kind of like a makeshift campaign all on your own, and your task is to get through each of the levels in turn, but you're also timed as you have like a bomb strapped to your chest, which is the whole concept behind Last Chamber, is that you're restricted by time, and the only way to prolong your life without the fear of being killed or being blown up is to literally grab elements throughout each of the levels and place them on specific time pads or keypads that you will see in each of the levels, depending on the mode that you're playing. The characters in question are designated by their colour types. So if you're playing in a multiplayer game, if you're playing say Elimination, you will be assigned a different colour type of character, and in order for you to stay alive long enough, you have to grab the timepiece or the star or the bomb element, and you have to place it on your designated time zone. But what's quirky and unique about this game for the time, which was relatively new and was unheard of, is that the gameplay was dynamic. Even though you're in one room, but you could change the orientation of the room at any given point. So as you can see on the walls, you can see like arrows pointing up and moving around the place. Once you highlight and stand beside one of those arrows, the player can kick the wall, and what happens is it rotates the room, which for the time was quite unique, and it was very ahead of its time in most cases, as there was a lot of dynamic elements in the game that you would not have seen. You wouldn't even have thought that these type of elements were even possible in games back then, but they were able to do that with this, which was pretty cool. There's quite a lot of really cool elements in this game that for the most part was quite overlooked. Even though the game did get decent reviews, in some cases it definitely got high reviews in most magazines and articles, but it got lower reviews in other games magazines, and it was just a mixture of opinions in terms of what the game offered. The game itself at the time would have been quite difficult to master and to pick up and play, because again it was relatively new and not many people understood the concept of the game, of what it was about and even how you play it. So whoever was playing it in the magazines at that time probably weren't into those type of games, so they instantly dismissed it or just left it out to dry pretty much. But in saying that, the game itself had a lot to offer, even though it was limited in terms of like say the levels and stuff, but there was plenty of modes, there was a lot there to do, and if you were playing with your mates, there was a lot of fun to be had if you could understand the whole dynamics and the mechanics of the game, which I'll be honest, for an absolute beginner coming in, it is a difficult game to get to grips with. But what's it like to play years later? Well, I remember going back to my first experience with the game, and I remember my mate Derek had gotten access to it, because the one thing about this game, that you could get access to it in the likes of game stores, and you could get copies of the game for very cheap, for as little as like $10 or £10 at the time. And I remember he had access to it, and he brought it over one day and we all tried to play it. Now we didn't have access to a multi-tap, but we tried to play it with 2-player, and at the time trying to figure out what to do, because there was so much going on, because the gameplay, it is fast and it is very frantic. You have these wee character sprites, 2D sprites running around 3D environments, and it can be difficult to know where to actually be at the time, and trying to figure out what to do was a bit confusing. I suppose at that time you were still relatively new to games. Like from my own experience, you were getting used to the likes of playing Resident Evil and playing like 3D racing games like Ridge Race or Destruction Derby. So to go and play something like this, even though you were getting used to a lot of those type of games, this game was definitely very confusing. So even though it was decent enough to play, but you couldn't really figure out what it was that you needed to do, especially with the multiplayer elements. Even though it was fun for the most part, it was difficult because you didn't really understand the whole concept of the game. And then even when you go into the likes of the single player mode, when you're trying to play through the likes of a tournament where you have to progress throughout each of the levels, it was difficult because you were on your own and you had to try and get to the end of the level where you had loads of different obstacles and traps to avoid along the way, and you had to solve kind of like puzzle elements while rotating the room so that you could get the bomb element to the time point before the time ended and you would blow up. So it definitely took a bit of getting used to, and I will admit my own experience of it personally when I played it, I didn't really understand the concept of it back then and I couldn't really get into it at that time. So my mate had it and he played it for a bit. Now he tried to understand as well. I think he was kind of a bit confused with it too, but as a lot of people I think would have gotten confused with it back then because it was something that not everybody would have played or let alone have been interested in. But how does it fare right now, going back and even looking at it now from a modern perspective? Having gone back to it and allowing myself to really sit down and play with it, and because I've played a lot of these type of games over the years, because even with modern takes of games, a lot of the inspiration would have come from the likes of this, and there are quite a number of likes of independent style games and budget style games that are available that use very similar gameplay style mechanics, and you can see the influence behind them when you go back to play this game. And having gone back to play it and now putting a bit of time into it, I understand the game a lot more than I did back then. I can understand what you need to do, and the multiplayer is still as difficult as hell when you try to play it. I'm not going to deny that it's still really tough, but you will have your work cut out for you. But it is fun when you allow yourself to really just sit down with it and when you understand what to do. But where I really had the most fun was playing on the single player mode, trying to complete the levels, because as the years have gone on, once I've gotten into playing different types of games, I've realised that I really start to enjoy the likes of puzzle based style games, and this game has it in spades. It really does, because again the gameplay style is so dynamic, the way you can rotate the rooms, you have to avoid loads of obstacles and traps, and you really need to think about what you're doing, and you also have to be mindful. The fact is that you have to collect items, but you also have to do it within a certain time, so you have to learn to adapt and get very quick at the game, and that only comes through practice. So if you do allow yourself to sit down and play with it and give it time and try to understand what the game is about, and if you do like these type of games, you may actually have a bit of a laugh with this one. Again, it's not for everybody, I will admit that. Even going back, when I look back years ago, it wouldn't have been the type of game I really would have been into, or it wouldn't have appealed to me back say 20 years ago. By looking at it now, I would sit and play it and enjoy it now, whereas I wouldn't have done back then, and I have done with this video going back to it, because it was one of those games that I will be honest, at first I was kind of hesitant to kind of try and revisit, because at the time when I didn't understand it, I was like, will I be able to understand it and even know what to do? But having sat down and allowed myself to do it, I understand now what I need to do, and I understand the concepts, because I have played other games like this on modern consoles and they were quite good, and going back to play an early take on it, this is actually a decent game. I know it may not be for everybody, but it is one of those games I definitely think that is worth trying out, and you might be surprised if you do like a good mix of puzzle elements mixed with time based elements and even dynamic gameplay. There's plenty here to keep you involved. It's not to say that it's easy, this game is definitely not easy by any means, but the more practice you put in, the better you'll get at it, and you will have a lot of fun along the way. And there's plenty of levels in here, all just as difficult as the last one. They will definitely test your patience and your skill to the absolute maximum, in fairness, but there's definitely enough here that is worth looking into. It can be fiddly, I will admit, but you get out of it what you're willing to put in, and looking at it back in it now, this is a decent game, even though a lot of people may not agree with me. But from playing it myself and having played like these type of games, I actually find it quite decent, and I would definitely go back to play it again. And when I think about it now, I should have allowed myself to really enjoy it more back then, but I suppose your ideas change as years go on. You see things from a different perspective. Games that you may not have thought of were good back then, or a lot better than you think, but you didn't understand them back then, so you just never really gave them the time of day. But when you do allow yourself to give them time, you might be surprised. There is definitely a few hidden gems here, and I definitely think for me, I enjoy playing this, so it is one of them. Now, it is difficult to play through to get through the campaign. Like, I got so far myself, and it gets to a point where it gets so difficult that it's just, you're completely just bamboozled by what to do, because the levels get more difficult the more you play through. The traps and the areas become a lot more intricate, so it definitely takes a lot longer to figure out what to do, but that's all part of the challenge and the fun. And if you can do that and master it, you will have a good, worthwhile experience in your hands. It is something that I genuinely think is worthwhile playing if you want something that really has good puzzle elements with a good mix of multiplayer style gameplay as well, something that's a wee bit different. I would recommend that you go and check it out, and I'm sure you'll be able to get access to this quite easily, because the game itself, you used to be able to get any amount of copies of this this game like in bargain bins and game stores over the years, so I'm sure you'd still be able to get a copy of it somewhere if you could. But I'd highly recommend you just check it out, even just add it to your collection. And I'd love to know what your thoughts are of Last Chamber, if you have played it back in the day, and if so, what do you think of it? Did you enjoy it, or did you find it too difficult? Be sure to share it down in the comments below. And if you have enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more of these type of videos where I do explore a lot more of these unusual and obscure quirky style games that were released on the PS1, where I share my thoughts and experience with everyone, then be sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be updated when future videos are released. And do feel free to check around the channel, as I do provide other reviews and gameplay style videos of other unique and quirky style games that were also released on the PS1 back in the day. So be sure to check those videos out, and until next time, make sure to keep playing those classic games and enjoying them, and keep those gaming memories alive.